Welcome back, Indiana Sports Beat Radio here on this Friday for you. We appreciate you being with us so much. Hope you're having a great day. Get ready for the weekend. We're trying to get you in that direction. Zach Osterman from the Indy Star joins us now. And Zach, there's plenty where we can try to squeeze in. Of course, the new schedule that has been a great topic already. The Big Ten released the new schedule that for the next 5 years, which it's kind of cool to see that entire layout and how that is. But I think that I've not looked at everybody's, but the Indiana and the few I've looked at, I'm like, man, they look like they did a pretty good job with it. And I'm not really seeing any complaints. My only complaint, and I've said this already a couple times during the show, so not to be redundant, but Iowa was allowed to protect 3 games. And I think that there should be a 2-game limit with protected rivalries. No other team has that. Penn State has 0. Most teams have 1 or 2, maybe. Indiana.
What was Iowa's? So Iowa protected Minnesota and Nebraska. What was the third one?
Wisconsin.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Which that's a solid series though, and it's close. It's Wisconsin, I think, leads 45-43. Nebraska is really that's the one that probably should get kicked. They played 53 times in 131 years. And Iowa's won 8 out of the last 10. To me, it's just like adding another game. Minnesota is also, I've used the reference that it reminds me of the IU-Purdue basketball series, because if you look at go all the way back in the annals of the records, Minnesota was apparently a badass in football back in at the turn of the 19th century, because they won the first 18 straight, and I think 30 out of the first 34 or something. But now Iowa has won 8 straight and 30 out of the last 41 contests with Minnesota. So that's just been another yearly win for them. But either way, I just think when no one else has done 2 or 3, there should just be a limit. You're allowing that somebody to lay out their own Big Ten schedule, a third of their own Big Ten schedule, along with a third of their non-conference games. Boom, that's a nice little 6-game package. Not that Wisconsin is probably going to be an easy game, but I think there should have been a limit of 2.
I suppose. I mean, I think, Wisconsin and Minnesota are both trophy games, obviously, and I'd forgotten about the Heartland Trophy. Forgive me. And then, of course, there's the Floyd of Rosedale. I think, for better or worse, we're probably preserving the Iowa game or the Iowa-Nebraska game, so that Nebraska continues to kind of build some sort of rivalry and heritage within the conference. I guess I hadn't given it too much thought. I mean, I think the one that obviously I think some Indiana fans are curious about would be the Michigan State game, but that game wasn't always protected. I can remember, I want to say Indiana won the Spittoon at one point when I was in college, and then they didn't play again for 2 or 3 years. So Indiana had it for a while. The bucket game has always been the protected game for Indiana for obvious reasons. So, it is a decent bit. On the other hand, I would say, in Iowa's defense or whatever you want to say, I mean, that's, those are 3.
It's smart.
Well, those are also 3 games that aren't necessarily gimmies for Iowa. Certainly Wisconsin is always going to have a robust program. Minnesota doesn't look like slowing down anytime soon under PJ Fleck. So,
they've won 8 straight against Minnesota and 30 out of the last 41.
I still think that's not going to be a straightforward matchup for them for the foreseeable future. I get your point. I just, it's kind of one of those where I think if there was another school that, if Indiana had 2 other trophy games that weren't protected, then they could make that argument. But again, and I'm using Indiana as an example. If there was some other school that had, 3 trophy games and it said, well, how come we aren't protecting those? Then maybe it would be there'd be a bit more of a case. I just think that from the perspective of the conference, you're holding on to games that do, I think, have some measure of meaning to fans at a time when, quite frankly, you're throwing a lot of, other tradition and convention out the window. So I don't think it's the worst thing in the world.
I think I suggested that Indiana should have created a trophy game with Northwestern, who also has one protected game. Call it the Businessman Special, with the business schools go at it or something, to just add a game onto the schedule, because it's certainly going to be an interesting one. I think the Big Ten, again, I think they did a good job with it. Very interesting. But the thing in Indiana's schedule for next year, the two things that have jumped off the page for me instantly were that they get to go to the Rose Bowl to play UCLA in Pasadena, but bigger, in a year that will probably be without question, be a make or break year for Tom Allen. Kalen DeBoer and Washington come to Bloomington to play as well. So those are the two of the things that kind of highlighted the schedule, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, what stood out to me was that Indiana was supposed to, under the revised post LA schools pre-Oregon Washington schedule, Indiana wasn't supposed to play either of Ohio State or Michigan next year. And obviously, you're not going to go, 8 years without playing either of those teams, but it felt a little bit like, sort of, after having to figure out how to survive in the Big Ten East for 10 years, it felt sort of poetic that Indiana's first year out of the East, it was, going to get a year where it didn't have to play either of those two schools. Now, not only do you bring both of those schools back on the schedule, they play Michigan at home and I think Ohio State away, but you also have Washington at home and UCLA away. And so you're kind of getting the double barrel of, getting the difficulty of the Big Ten East back in a lot of ways, while also adding two of the Pac-12 schools that are going to make things, frankly, a lot harder for programs like Indiana. And I also think, there was some blowback, obviously, on Scott Dolson at the time. But anybody who looks at these schedules and doesn't understand why Indiana is trying to make its non-conference life as easy as possible right now, I just don't know what to tell you. Indiana's just got to find a way to make, at a minimum 6 games as practical as possible, and then try to give yourself a platform to build from there, because the conference is just getting tougher.
This is why for those that do not understand, this is why they got out of the Louisville series. Louisville is not a team that is going to be a middling team. I think Jeff Brom is going to be successful there. Hell, he's 5-0 right now. But Purdue, we were just talking with Travis Miller from Boiler Upload. Purdue, God bless them, Notre Dame is on their schedule next year, and they have a return game that they owe Oregon State. So they're really going to get. I think their only game that's not either a Big Ten game or a major Power 5 game is with Indiana State. So they're loaded up with Purdue Notre Dame on the schedule for the next 5 years. That's not what Indiana's program can withstand at this moment. I agree with you. They've got to have games to build on, because their schedule next year is harder than it probably would have been if it had been the original schedule. I mean, playing Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan, yeah, that's going to be tough. But right now there wasn't a fourth juggernaut in the Big Ten, where now they do have, of course, I don't know what USC is going to be like next year for sure, but it's a pretty good guess they're going to be a top 10 school. Ohio State's going to be top 10. Michigan's going to be top 10. Washington, not sure, but they're going to be, no matter what, it's going to be, they're not going to just fall off the face of the planet. So I think they have a tougher schedule next year than they would have.
No, I mean, I think that's. I mean, they absolutely have a tougher schedule next year than they would have. I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, again, going back to, going back to what it was supposed to be, and what Indiana wound up with. Just in terms of getting, Ohio State back on, Michigan back on, as we talked about, adding Washington. And I mean, we knew Indiana was supposed to play UCLA on the road next year anyway, even before the switch. Indiana was supposed to have UCLA on the road next year, and then USC and Bloomington the year after that. So we kind of knew that, at least through, I guess that would be the 2025 season. But yeah, I mean, if you spin it forward to like 2025, Indiana's got to go to Iowa, Oregon, and Penn State, and it's going to host UCLA and Wisconsin. It gets Michigan and Ohio State off the schedule, but I guess they switched up the UCLA game or the USC game then for 2025. But it's just, generally speaking, it's hard to imagine a world where Indiana gets a schedule more than once every 8 to 10 years now, given that you have Oregon, given that you have Washington, both LA schools, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. Let's assume at least 2 of Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, Michigan State, maybe somebody else are, let's say 9-win caliber or better most years. It's just hard to imagine Indiana getting a schedule more than once in maybe a decade that doesn't include, 6, 7, not just bowl teams, but robust bowl teams, teams that are going to win 8, 9 games at a minimum, teams that might be in the periphery of the playoff. I mean, it's just, it's only going to get harder. And I know Indiana fans probably don't want to hear that, and I understand why. But it just, I mean, I don't know. Like I'm scrolling forward now to 2026. Indiana's got to go to Michigan, Nebraska, and Washington, and it's going to host Ohio State and USC. You go down to 2027, got to go to USC, got to go to Minnesota. You're going to host Michigan, Iowa, and Penn State. I mean, it just, and we can go on and on. We can go through the whole schedule. I agree with you that I think the Big Ten did its best in this, and we all could recognize there was going to be no perfect scheduling formula. It's going to be fascinating to see what they try to come up with for basketball, because a 20-game basketball schedule with 18 teams in the league just isn't practical. I mean, if you play, what are you going to do? You're going to play 17 teams, or 14 teams once and 3 teams twice. I mean, how do you make that equitable across the course of a number of years? I don't know. But it just, this is the reality of conference consolidation. I think that's probably what we should call it at this point. It's not expansion. It's not realignment. It's consolidation. And it's only going to get harder for the Indianas of the world in a sport like football.